Hello! In this video, I will be discussing the relationship between grassroots civil rights activists and civil rights reformers in the federal government. I am also going to be explaining the motivating factors, perspectives, and goals for each group. I will also discuss which group was more responsible for civil rights reform. So I'm going to begin with explaining who the grassroots civil rights activists were and what their motivating factors were. Grassroots civil rights activists were common folk. They were not political figures, they were primarily blacks and ethnic individuals who wanted to see change. Motivating factors for these activists included oppression, racial injustice, and violence. Racial injustice and violence was a motivating factor, especially after there was a lot of violence caused by the police. Malcolm X, who was a civil rights leader, discussed the truth about the police brutality that was seen against members of Islam in Los Angeles. Malcolm X spoke on a radio station after the press released a false story on the occurrence that made it seem that the police officers' actions were right and just. As stated by Malcolm X on the radio, in the shooting that took place, 7 men were shot. 7 Muslims were shot. None of them were armed. None of them were struggling. None of them were fighting. None of them were trying to defend themselves at all. And after being taken to the police station, they were held for 48 hours and weren't even given hospitalization. So these pictures that I have, on the top, you see Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, who are both civil rights leaders. And then in the bottom, you see a confrontation between police and some activists who also happen to be members of the NAACP. Now I will discuss the perspectives of the grassroots activists. These activists experience unjust treatments, vexation, and hope. Unjust treatments were seen through unnecessary arrests and bombings of homes. They experienced vexation because they were constantly criticized that their methods were too violent or too aggressive, even though they weren't. However, they also experienced hope. According to a reflection by David Havens on Document 10, all of us shared faith that we could change the system. We knew in our heart of hearts that solving social problems was our responsibility, but more important, we also knew it was achievable if we worked hard enough. Now, I will discuss the goals. The grassroots activists wanted change by striving to use peaceful protests. According to a letter from a Birmingham jail on Document 4, it is wrong to use immoral means to attain moral ends. So grassroots activists followed this and made sure to use peaceful protests like sit-ins and marches. Grassroots activists wanted freedom for Black communities to be able to choose their own destiny. They also wanted employment, decent housing, education, and an end to police brutality, justice, and peace. They wanted fair trials and release of those African Americans from jail that did not receive it. According to the Black Panther Party on Document 15, the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution gives a man a right to be tried by his peer group. We have been and are being tried by all white juries that have no understanding of the average reasoning man of the Black community. So this shows that they also wanted the Constitution to be upheld, and for Black people to have a jury that fit with their peer group when brought to trial. So I have 3 photos here. The top photo, it is one of the marches that I was talking about, and if you look on the signs that they have, some of them say, like, one of them says that they want decent housing and freedom. So you can see some of the things that I was talking about in that photo. In the bottom left corner, you see the Black Panther Party in front of Lincoln Memorial. And then on the right picture in the bottom, this is a sit-in. So they use sit-ins a lot for protests. Moving on, I will be discussing the civil rights reformers in the federal government. So these reformers were primarily, actually they were political figures, like presidents, congressmen, for example. So first I'm going to discuss the motivating factors for this group. This group wanted peace and change because there was a lot of violence and riots going on, as well as segregation. So according to a report on Document 18, it says, our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. So they wanted desegregation. Moving on to perspectives. So President Lyndon B. Johnson was a part of this group, and when Johnson came into office after President Kennedy's assassination, there was a lot going on at that time. There were riots, there were laws that were having a difficult time being passed, like a civil rights law and a tax law. There were budgets that were coming up. So Johnson felt a lot of pressure to make changes. So this group did experience a lot of pressure. Now I am going to be discussing the goals. So for this group, they wanted to pass laws that helped the civil rights movement. They wanted laws that fought against racial injustices and that transpired peace. They also wanted desegregation, so their goals were similar to the grassroots activists. Now I'm going to talk about the relationship between these two groups. So the grassroots activists and the civil rights reformers in the federal government did somewhat support one another, and they also slightly worked together to fight for the same cause. This can be seen by a conversation between Martin Luther King and President Johnson. So, quoting from that conversation, it goes like this. So Johnson says, I'm going to support them all, and you can count on that. And I'm going to do my best to get other men to do likewise. And I'll have to have you all's help. I never needed it more than I do now. So Johnson is talking about the policies that need to be made into laws that I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the perspectives of the federal government civil rights reformers. Johnson says he needs help from the grassroots activists. Martin Luther King, he then goes on and says that the grassroots activists will help. So this quote shows that the two groups had a good supporting relationship. And in this photo here, it shows President Johnson, Martin Luther King, and some other civil rights leaders. Like I know there is one member of the NAACP in this photo as well. So I'm going to also discuss which group was most responsible for the civil rights reform. My answer is that it was the grassroots activists, because they were the ones who did the sit-ins, the marches, and the other peaceful protests in order to gain attention to the issues at hand. They were not political figures, and they were primarily common folk. Yet, by their actions, they made the public wake up and become aware of the issues that were going on. They spread awareness and fought for reform. And this is my bibliography. So I'm going to leave it here for a few moments. Okay, thank you so much for watching.